Welcome to Art 181. We'll be taking a look today at the acrylic painting process. So these are water-based paints with a sort of plastic as acrylic. So it's very, very durable, works on wood, works on regalia, works fine on paper. This is acrylic paint pad. You can also use multimedia, watercolor, or even poster board. So first things first, we have our design. You'll notice all the connecting points we've erased so that we can very clearly see what should be red and what should be black. And so first things first is shake up the paint, or else it might separate. And that can just be stirred back in. And so about as much paint as you would, if you imagine toothpaste on a toothbrush. You don't really need to use much more than that in a sitting. It's also important to have a paper towel or scrap paper around, and then some water. And so the goal with acrylic paint, with any paint really, but when painting form line, we want smooth edges. We want the coverage. We don't want to see through the paint. And so this being, again, a water-based paint, if you're using paint out of a tube, you may have to thin it with some water. I highly recommend finding some paint brushes with these nice pointy bristles. And so for the sake of this video, I actually have my painting taped to the table. Kind of hard to talk today. It's taped down so it doesn't move around, but you can rotate your paper or canvas. You can even use the back of a cereal box if you don't have anything else to paint on. And so I like to start with the edges, because if you've got nice clean pencil lines, you can see exactly where the paint needs to go and where it needs to stop. Make sure I have those edges first, and then we can fill in the rest with a bigger paintbrush. And so these square tips are good for that. If you're feeling really confident in your painting abilities and technique, of course, you can try doing this whole thing with a wider brush. But I do recommend, again, starting with the edges. And so you want to use smooth motion with the paintbrush, because if you move too slowly, try lots of starts and stops, it's difficult to get this crisp edge. And if you're using pencils, which pretty much everybody should be at this point, it's very, very important to get all the way up to that pencil line. But if there's any pencil lead left visible on the paper, we can just wait until our paint is nice and dry. I'm talking like at least an hour. It'll be dry quicker than that, but dry enough to erase. About an hour is good. And if you go over the line a tiny bit, don't panic. You can add more paint. Just make your lines a little bolder. Or if you're really invested and it's a big mistake, we'll call it a big slip, you can take some white paint and paint over the background afterwards. And so remember that thought experiment about a tiny vehicle trying to drive around the very edge of your design. Hang on to that, because it's not just for the sake of the pencil lines. The goal is, again, crisp borders. And after you've painted a big section of your design, after it's dried, if you still see through the paint any place, just give it another coat. But we definitely don't want to see through the paint. And of course, you can make art happen with watercolors. And with a bit of practice, you can paint with the outside edge of your brush. And again, don't feel bad if you have to rotate your canvas. I've been painting for at least a few decades now, so I wouldn't say I'm fast at this, but I am fairly efficient. And since the paint, this paint, straight out of the bottle, this is Americana brand. It's got a fair amount of water in it, yet it seems just thick enough so I get a nice opaque coating on the first pass. If the paint were a little bit thicker, I would just probably add a little bit of water to my brush. And so acrylic paints are available in bottles. You can get them in tubes. Some very expensive tubes. The paint has a consistency much like a paste. And so there you're pretty well expected to add water. But in these bottles, and maybe the taller standing toothpaste looking bottles also have a little more liquid in them. And you notice I'm kind of moving around the design. That's because again, it's letting one area dry, but also I like to get as much of the borders done as possible before moving to a wider paintbrush. And if you're at home painting on your dining table, probably is a good idea to put down a newspaper. Maybe wear an old hoodie. Because acrylic paint is fairly permanent. If it gets on you, you need to wash it off right away. Clothing. Okay. So we'll need a bit more of this. And do this flatter brush. A little bit of moisture on it just to get it started. But we don't want it holding too much water. And the nice thing about using a specialized painting board, again, this one is for acrylic, like specially made for acrylic paint. And so it'll just say acrylic on the front. But the great thing about these versus if you try painting on just a regular paper or even some poster boards, the art pad is it's made to resist wrinkling. And so many great painters throughout recent history have sold works on paper or cardboard. I haven't myself, but I don't really deal with those kinds of galleries, or maybe, I don't know, just haven't really tried it. If I'm making something commercially, I like using canvases, stretched, different shapes and sizes. I think having a variety of canvases to paint on can make the process a bit more fun. There's that bit of problem solving of what kind of design is going to work for this kind of canvas and this kind of shape. And you notice I'm dipping my brush kind of frequently in my paint. I don't want to leave a big blob of it anywhere for too long, because it'll dry up, and it's good to have some paint texture on the painting. I think a certain amount of it, it's nice to see, you know, we look at it and we can see that it's a painting. I think if the paint's a little thick on the edges of your form line, that's kind of a good thing. Again, for the effect of it. But we don't want to leave any big globs anywhere to dry out, as it could be distracting to our final effect we're going for. And be sure to give your brush a good rinse anytime you're going to change brushes, anytime you change colors. Because if the paint dries, especially right close to the handle, it will reduce the effectiveness and the lifespan of your paintbrush. If you've got a fan, it's good to leave a nice breeze will help dry the paint. And this is a good idea, especially before we go inside and work on the red, because it's very easy to pick up some paint with your hand and then accidentally deposit it elsewhere on the design.